Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever felt stuck, bogged down, or don't know where to turn, then do we have the U-Turn show for you. Today I'll be talking with Ashley Stahl, former counter-terrorism professional turned career coach, Forbes blogger, and the author of a powerful new book to turn your life, U-Turn. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about how to get unstuck, discover your direction, and even design your dream career. That, plus we'll talk about the divine unknown and Grandma Lorraine, a birthday trauma and luggage, gotcha, Aunt Jeanette and where the sidewalk ends, Benny the cab driver, what it means to be a goose, what on earth is a snacksident, and what in the world getting kicked out of preschool for headbutting has to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Ashley. Are you ready to shine?
Wow, you really didn't just read the book, but you pulled some of the best moments out all in a 20-second clip. How amazing.
Woo-hoo!
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, Ashley. So I can't believe we're going to go for some of the highlights. I'll put that in quotes because we're going to come back to many of them to not quite so highlight. What happened when you were, I can't believe I'm going to ask this, attacked, beaten, hooded, and thrown in the back of a van?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are so many different moments in my life that took me there, but ultimately my decision to work in counterterrorism wasn't fully thought out. And I don't know if I could say it was not fully thought out, or I just didn't have the experience to really know if it was the experience for me. And I think often that's how life is. It's almost like we try to think and think and think and prevent ourselves from making a misstep or landing in the wrong spot. And in my case, I thought as far as I could go, and I ended up choosing a career in counterterrorism. So in my early 20s, there was this moment where I was working on different military bases, and it was a really late night. And my supervisor had mentioned to me in the morning, he said, look, if you're out past 10 p.m., you're fair game. They're doing kidnapping exercises, and you definitely don't want to be caught in the crossfire of that. And I didn't really think much of it because there's always different exercises going on military bases. Like, you just don't really think about it. But what was actually happening past 10 p.m. that evening was that there were all sorts of different military trainees that were looking for planted people on the base who were there to be kidnapped and captured. And I ended up going to the cafeteria at like 10:30, 11 p.m. at night, going to get a little oatmeal, only to find all of the buildings were dark, everything was shut down, and then boom, I became a victim of the kidnap and capture exercises. And it was just this weird moment where I forgot that it was happening, obviously. And so the shock of being grabbed and having a bag over my head took a second to register that that was what I walked into. And that was just one of many different moments working in national security, realizing like this is not the right path for me.
Well, it sounds like at 24, you've got a near six-figure job. You find out the person who actually has a desk in the office that you don't is actually making $17,000 more than you. And he basically says, because I'm a guy.
Yeah.
And you're registering, what in the world am I doing here, Toto?
Yeah, exactly. I feel like there's so much to your career, right? There's what you're doing, there's the skills you're using, there's your job title and your responsibilities, but then there's how you're doing it. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people miss the mark on, and especially me in my case. I mean, how my job looked meant the people that I was working with, my core values, what it meant for the career I chose. And I ended up in a path where I was just surrounded by people and a culture that wasn't a fit for me.
Where you talk about what you kind of rail against, do what you love and the money will follow, or follow your passion. Were you actually passionate about this path up until the reality, in quotes, set in?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different things that I was interested in and passionate about talking about, but I didn't realize at the time there's such a big difference between being passionate about something, wanting to talk about it, wanting to study it, versus being someone who works in that arena. I mean, one of the things I talk about in my book is consumption versus production. And so I loved consuming politics. I found it really interesting, but it didn't mean that I was endowed with a certain skill set that would make me a fit to be a producer in the world of politics, to use the skills that were required for me to make a really big impact, especially in national security. So for me, at the Pentagon, just kind of looking around, realizing, wow, this is my first day on the job. I'm grateful in the sense where I hustled my way into that job. And so many people have these big dreams, kind of like I did. It takes them years to get to that dream. And I think that's why a lot of us can have meltdowns, like Britney Spears, who shaved her head, or Lindsay Lohan, who, like all of these celebrities, they get this big dream and then they have this meltdown. And I think for me, it was a blessing that I was able to get my big dream really early on without spending years and years and years beyond my college education figuring out and in this fantasy of whether it would be a fit for me or not. And so my first day meeting somebody who was making more money than I was for the same job, ending up not getting assigned a desk because I was a girl, is what he said. I mean, it was
literally, you were not given a desk. You had to just sit on a chair until actually somebody recognized you for your skills and said, honey, here, have a desk.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say I was a defense contractor. So, in the government, you're looked upon a little bit differently if you're a government hired professional versus a contractor that the government paid a company to execute on a task. So even though the only difference really at the Pentagon is a pink ID card versus a white one, when they see that little color pink, they know that you're a contractor, and sometimes you do get treated differently.
Not to mention the fact that you are a female in a world that, what did he tell you the first day?
Well, I mean, there's so many things he told me, but he was saying I'm rolling with the military now. And just like in Afghanistan, where women have to earn their place, I would have to earn my spot working with him. And that it's worthy to note that I was working on a program relating to Afghanistan. So he was just kind of using the lens of that culture and applying it to our situation in the United States.
So let's go from there. I want to dive into a key pivotal moment for you in a minute, which we were actually talking about off air. But let's go to consumer versus producer, because when I think about likes, loves, passions, money, all of these things mixed together, I often think we're just 1 degree off. And in your case, when we talk about consumer and producer, what you were amazing at, on the one hand, got you in a lot of quote unquote trouble, got you hooded and put in a van, but is actually what you do now for others. You're amazing at finding the dream job, at helping yourself to get the dream job. And 1 degree off means you could help others. You weren't as far off as it seems. You were very, very close. 1 turn of the dial, and you were where you want to be.
Exactly. And I think that this is an area that so many people miss the mark. And I'm so glad you're bringing this up. One thing that I talk about a lot in my book is this idea that industries are like pies with many different slices. And far too often, somebody will be eating the wrong slice of what is otherwise a really big pie in their career, whether it's the government industry or, I've had so many clients who worked in film and maybe they were a production assistant, but they were actually meant to be a screenwriter. And so it's so important that instead of saying, wow, this doesn't taste good, I'm going to throw away the whole thing, getting a little bit more tactical, a little bit more exact, and saying, okay, I'm eating the wrong slice of the pie here, but does that really mean I need to completely say that this career path isn't for me? And I find this with a lot of entrepreneurs, like their business isn't feeling inspiring, especially coaches who will come to me for mentorship. And more often than not, I have got to tell you, I'll figure out with them that they still want to be in their coaching business. They just need to change who their client is, who they're helping, or what results they're promising their clients so that they can feel more in alignment with how they're operating and how they're spending their day. And so for anybody listening who's not feeling totally connected to their career, I would just hope they can kind of reflect and ask themselves, am I completely off? Or is there something about this, maybe something small, that would make everything feel so much better for me?
Awesome, awesome. So now let's go to the last moment. You're there. This is consumers versus producer. You're like, it'd be really cool. It's really important. Somebody who you had known and worked with had gotten killed in Afghanistan. And you came up with this idea that civvies, as I'm guessing we'd be calling them, let's arm them, so that they at least stand a fighting chance, or at least so that if they grab for a gun, they know what to do to save themselves. Mm-hmm. But the next thing you know, you're actually having a hot gun placed in your hand.
Yeah, so there was a phenomenon going on in Afghanistan at the time. So it's just worthy to note my program that I was managing was preparing senior level officials from our government to deploy to Afghanistan for a year, if not 2, and advise people in the Afghan Ministry of Defense and Interior. So they were partnered with Afghan citizen counterparts that they were helping and guiding and mutually learning from each other. At that time, there was a rise of something in the media called insider attacks. And what that meant was that a lot of these partners were showing up to work, and the people we would deploy would have a gun to their head from the person that they were collaborating with. So it was just this weird surprise that we were seeing. And obviously it's expected when you're going into another country, you're kind of a foreigner in somebody else's land. So it wasn't totally off to find that this was happening, but it started to be really increasing, and something that a lot of advisors who were deploying, who I was helping, that they were getting really scared of. So I ended up taking initiative on introducing a weapons program, hiring the best talent I could find, getting the Pentagon to endow our advisors with a weapon so that when they deployed, they had some form of self-protection. That being said, a lot of people are more of a threat to themselves if they don't know how to use a gun than they are to anybody else. I read in research you're 14 times more likely to cause harm to yourself than to somebody else if you own a gun and don't know how to use it. So we went into very intensive training, and there was a moment where, even though I was overseeing all of this and I was in my early 20s running this to the best of my abilities with really good guidance, honestly, I mean, minus the guy who told me I couldn't get a desk, there were other people on the team who were really bright. And as this was happening, I kind of realized, like, I've never held a gun before. And as I was going to somebody had to go to the restroom, they handed me their gun to hold it for them. And it was in that moment I realized I'm holding a loaded gun. I've never held a loaded gun before, let alone any gun. And it was something about that practical experience that it sounds like a joke looking back if I talk about it. Like, how could I go into counterterrorism and the world of national security and be afraid of holding a weapon? But there's something about what you fantasize about an experience versus what it actually is. And I see this with a lot of job seekers. Like, they have a fantasy when they're applying for jobs. They think that something they're applying for is like the thing, and they're so excited, and they have this life in their head of what it could be. And it's not that it's not the case. It's not that they're wrong, but you can't know if they're correct either.
Well, it's interesting because people come to me, well, they come to both of us, I'm sure, and say, I'd like $1 million. What I want to do is I want to make $1 million. And they have no idea that what they may be doing to make that $1 million is completely giving up, not their soul, but giving up their time, giving up their health, giving up who knows what in the search of that thing, when what they really wanted was something completely different.
Yeah, and it's so important to ask yourself when you have monetary goals, like, what do you really think the money is going to give you? What is the money actually about? In my case, money is about freedom. So, I mean, I'm free with or without money, honestly, and that's just a state of mind. But I will say, when I have more money, I do enjoy the freedom that I can get with my time and with traveling. And so it's important to just really know what you're going for. And then also to notice when your mind tries to overshoot it, because we're so security focused that sometimes we'll double, triple, or quadruple what we actually need. And we set ourselves up for these very stretchy goals that in some ways could be inspiring, but in other ways can really exhaust us and burn us out.
So this kind of jumps ahead or out of order or in order, but I'm very curious. You started a company early on in your life, but you had a money mindset that, I think the exact line was something to the effect of, once you no longer had to struggle, you missed the struggle. And so you kind of metaphorically pulled out your own handgun and shot yourself back in the foot with some lawyers to get yourself back into struggle.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, no matter where we are in life, even if you really want a radical change, you can't have change without some form of loss. And so even if it's incredible change, even if you're marrying the love of your life, you're having a baby, some really beautiful life events are happening, with that gain comes a change and comes a loss of some other way of living that you've been in. And it's so natural when people are facing a lot of good change to feel this confusing feeling of loss. And so I just want to hopefully comfort anyone who is feeling like they're going through a lot of good changes and they're feeling a lot of loss. And so in my case, when it came to money, I grew up in a house where my dad was an entrepreneur. And he used to tell me, there's two ways you can live your life. You can live on a roller coaster or a merry-go-round. And what he meant was the roller coaster was entrepreneurship, like a wild ride. And then a merry-go-round was
danger, Will Robinson, danger.
Exactly. And then the merry-go-round is like a salaried job, like what you would expect in a circle. And I remember thinking as a kid, like, I don't like merry-go-rounds and I don't like roller coasters either. And it was interesting because growing up, when he had to close the doors on his business in the 80s, when the dot-com boom was happening, so much happened to his business and he had to close the doors and we lost our home. It was a period of time where there were so many messages going on in my mind. And the prevailing message was, when you don't have money, you don't have fun anymore, because he got really down and really stressed. And so it really impacted the environment in my household. He did everything he could as a dad to do his best. And I think a lot of people relate to that. Like, their parents were doing their best, and sometimes against, whatever they're doing, they're extremely stressed and worried about putting food on the table. And so in my household, I remember telling myself one night, I'm going to fix this. Like, I'm going to be the one that fixed all of this. So ever since I was, I want to say 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I mean, really a little kid, I have put the weight of fixing money for everybody around me on me. And I've had this duplicity inside of my consciousness where on one side it said, making money is going to kill me, because I watched it kill my dad in a lot of ways, the pursuit of it. And then the other message was, but I need a lot of it and I need to save everyone and it's all on me. So that was the perfect recipe later in life for an extraordinary burnout, but a lot of success as well.
Thank you for sharing. And it was, to me, it was even a recipe for going into counterterrorism, because when you saw the lack of security in your life growing up, you wanted to bring more security to the world.
Yeah, I've always kind of had a mama bear personality. Like, I think it started with having a little brother who, he's a really sharp kid now, and he's always been really smart. But in school, I remember in elementary school, he was in the resource classes because he was a slower learner. And I remember being a big sister. I was always very sharp. I won the spelling bee. Like, I was really on it. And to hear that he was in these classes that slowed down his learning really impacted this protector inside of me. And from there on out, anyone who even gave a whiff of picking on him, giving a hard time to him, I was right there and I was ready to use my words to terrify them. And, I think as I grew up and kind of integrated with myself, I always had a soft spot for the disadvantaged person, the person who was the underdog, the person who had a learning disability. And so this inner protector was always available inside of me. And it wasn't until I became an adult into my later teen years and early 20s that I realized how much I loved culture and politics. I always had a knack for learning languages, and that eventually translated into me asking myself, how can I protect people, not just personally, but to the nth degree? And the best way I thought I could was in national security at this higher level.
So let's go from there. You said this is the best way I can help people. You went through school. You went through some amazing schooling, internships. You banked everything on this career path. You've got a hot gun put in your hands, and all of a sudden it hits you. But now you have to do something that we in the West consider for losers. You have to quit. And I'm putting that in quotes, and I'm loading the gun, so to speak.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a really interesting dialogue in their head about quitting. And I think I'm so committed to my own liberation at all times and remembering what a free being I am. And so I really stand for that for anyone. And I do believe in some ways that discipline is the key to freedom. Obviously, like, I have a gluten intolerance and I'm lactose intolerant. And if I eat a bunch of pizza, even though it feels like freedom, I'm going to be sick and then I'm going to feel like a prisoner. So there's such a gift in having discipline. But I also just really want to remind people that if you don't like what you're doing, you don't have to go into a dialogue that you have to quit. You can go into a dialogue that you get to quit. Like, that's a mindset. You are free to go. You are a free bird and you don't have to be anywhere you don't want to be. And a lot of people will have golden handcuffs and say, well, I can't afford it. And my response would be, how much money do you actually need to be making? Crunch some numbers and see what you need to pay your bills. Consider even taking on a part-time pivotal job that supports you while you kind of look for your next thing. People really underestimate the importance or the value of a part-time job or some sort of transitional bridge job. And it's so important that we remember there's so many options for us when we're in transition. And transition is one of the most human things that we can reside in. I mean, you can't be someone all the time. You're also becoming someone. And in a lot of ways, we're always in transition. And it's important that you're willing to quit or let go of the things that aren't working for you in order to be the person that you want to be.
I think it's what was it, and you have it quoted in your book, Eckhart Tolle, all suffering disappears once you let go of attachment. If you say, I'm okay in the transition, it looks like this or that to the other person or your family, but I mean, come on, this is COVID time right now. Nobody has the straight and narrow. If not now, when on so many levels? So we might as well embrace this transition, this ugliness, this is going, whoa, this is not at all what I intended, rather than fighting against it.
Yes, exactly. And I think the amount of time we spend holding our career very heavily, getting ourselves in perfection paralysis. And one thing I talk about in my more recent TED Talk is just about how perfectionism is this mask that we all wear when we're afraid of failure. And funny enough, I had a typo in the word perfectionism in my TED Talk slide.
Yes. Please forgive me, but that is cool.
It was. And when I saw it, I was like, you literally can't make that up. It's so funny. And I'm such a good speller. So it was just me not being a perfectionist on my perfectionism slide. The point being that when we stay in perfectionism and we hold our choices super heavily, it's not to say you don't want to be mindful and think about your decisions and not make something so quick you haven't given it due thought. But it seems to be a way of life that some people live in where, and I would say most people, that they hold their decisions so heavily that by the time they make a decision on their next move, John Doe over there has done 3 other career moves and he's figured out what he really wants to do because he was willing to see his career as an experiment that can meet him where he is, that is a space for him to figure out what's best for him next.
Thank you. I want to get into core nature here. And part of what is kind of formulating together in my mind is that we often get stuck, and this was a challenge that you were able to magnificently overcome, although it took some work. We get stuck defining ourselves by our role rather than looking at what our true or core nature truly is.
Yeah, I mean, our core nature is the definition of the concept. And I talk about it in chapter 1 of my book because I just wanted to get straight to that concept as a foundation for your career. I find it to be the adjectives that people would use to describe the presence and energy that you bring to the room. And it's an incredible foundation for your career when you have that awareness. And so I love recommending to people to ask the close people around them, maybe a couple of colleagues, your parents, maybe 5 or 6 people, friends, just saying, hey, this crazy career coach on Inspire Nation told me to ask you this, but what would you use to describe, or what words would you use to describe the energy I bring to the room? Or another way to ask that question is, how does the room change when I walk in? How does the room feel when I walk in? And you want to pick people that you feel like have a pretty good sense of who you are in your natural state. So not somebody that you're playing any games with, you're putting on any masks with, colleagues that you feel comfortable with, friends that you feel like really see you. And once you are able to text them or email them that, and I recommend doing it that way so you can read their responses, it gives you a little bit of space to say, wow, these are the adjectives that people are using to describe my energy, what I uniquely bring, and which ones resonate for you, really picking the words that you feel like really comprise your nature, your essence. And from there, you can start to tune into who out there has a similar nature or essence? Who else would I describe in this way? And who are they being, or what are they doing in their career? And it's just such an incredible starting point. And while I talk about other concepts like your core skill set and what your best skill set is, your core values, all these other core concepts, I think your core nature is such a powerful starting point.
Thank you. I keep bringing up, it's one of my all-time favorite books, Blue Mind by Wallace J. Nichols, an ocean conservationist, amazing human being. And he talks about blue mind, gray mind, red mind. Red mind is we're fired up, we're anxious, we're nervous. Gray mind is we're numbed out. Blue mind was we're in a state of bliss. And right now, it seems more and more we are in this gray mind, overwhelmed, fried state. So could it even be difficult to tell what our core nature is if we're in that gray mind place? And how do we know if we're there or if we're burned out?
Yeah, this is a really great question. I would say the first thing is, so many people come to me, whether in my practice, my programs, my own podcast that you were a guest on. I mean, and they say to me, I don't have clarity and I don't know how to get it. And my response to that is you never need clarity. You just need to connect to yourself, because when you're connected to you, you can hear the answers. It's so much easier to know who you are, what you want, what feels good. There's so much intelligence in your intuition and in your own expansion. So when you feel good, there's an intelligence to that. And it's important to kind of ask yourself, why do I feel good right now? What is it about what I'm doing or what I'm hearing or where I'm being that feels really good? So if somebody is feeling like they're numbed out and they're not in a place to even connect and hear the message inside of their own wisdom of what's good for them, I would say grab a piece of paper and write down on a list, what are some of the people, places, things, activities that make you feel yourself? And in my case, going to the beach, being by the ocean, putting my feet in the sand, it does so much for me. There's a few friends that I have more than others. I have great friends, but there's a couple of them that I've noticed that whenever I leave them, I'm me again. And it's not just them. I mean, it's who I am with them. And it's the version of me that I know to be true. And so I would say start to do that and start implementing conversations, little day trips, whatever you can do to get back to yourself. That would be your first order of business. Don't put the pressure on to get clarity. Put the intention on just getting more connected to yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a woohoo. It occurs to me that all of these things, and you talk about it in the context of pushing through. So people say, I have to muscle through. I have to hang in there. It's COVID time. I can't afford to, which I think just that very statement is extremely dangerous. But what does all of this have to do with self-love?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think really loving yourself comes down to having options in your life and talking kindly to yourself. And when I say having options, it's because so many people will come to me and say, I feel stuck. And I know the only thing that's really stuck is their thinking, because there's so many things out there. And when you're stuck in your thinking, you're not creating options for yourself. And one of the messages I try to impart in my book is that life is a numbers game, and so is your career. And so the more you can put out there, and it's not about burning yourself out, but being intentional, really setting the intention to connect and connect and connect and be available for connection, whether it's conversations, networking groups, people, virtual events that you go to, whatever it is, setting the intention to connect, you start creating options for yourself. And when you have options for yourself, your life gets bigger and you get less stuck. So that's the first act of self-love that I'm always telling people to do in their career. And then secondly, just speaking very kindly to yourself and starting to notice that relationship you have with yourself.
Thank you. Since you said life is a numbers game, I want to dive into there more and make all the connections, as you eloquently put, as one of your chapter titles, I'll get it slightly off, but you never know who you're going to run into. There's a paraphrasing of it.
Yeah.
But how about if you define yourself as an introvert, somebody for whom bumping into or networking drains you rather than gives you energy?
Yeah. Then I would say, instead of going wide, go deep. Still go to the events, and instead of spraying and praying and trying to connect with everybody at the event, put the intention out to just connect with a couple of kindred spirits and really form an authentic relationship with them, follow up with them, be aware of them. I think that is also equally potent, because everybody you're walking towards is a walking flow chart of opportunities. They have other people in their life. And so if you can go deep and be intentional with them, you don't have to go wide like so many extroverts might.
Thank you. And since I never heard of it, a walking flow chart of opportunity. I'm going to have to quote you on that. I like that. I also look as spirit, universe, God, love, whatever you want to call it, as there are no coincidences. Everybody who comes into your life has a role to play. And if you can understand that, then you understand that you're in a game. And, oh, wow, why did I run into this person? Oh, wow, why are these two kids, forgive me, slapping each other on the plane next to me? Give me some rum at 7:45. I'm out of here. But everybody comes into your life for a reason. Would you agree?
Yes. I would totally agree. I really trust my life. And I think sometimes when I feel really off kilter, it's because I stopped doing that and I started buying into the limiting belief that everything is on me and I'm all alone. And that's the thing about grace. It really fills in the gaps in life. There's so many people in my life where, like, anybody who's listening to this podcast now, it's like, think about the most important two people you've ever met in your life, or even the one most important person. Was meeting them something you planned and controlled, or was it an act of grace? And what has happened in your life because of that person? And so for me, I know that hustling and pushing has its place, but I also have to remember that grace does too. And that really gives me that courage to trust life. And I think trusting life does take courage.
Completely agree. And so we've got to go to your grandma Lorraine and the divine unknown.
Yes, yes. So my mom's mom, my grandma Lorraine, she was a woman of God. She was very religious, and I never found myself to be highly religious, but always very spiritually connected. I remember even when I was 6 or 7 years old, I used to look in the mirror and be confused by my body. I remember looking in the mirror and saying to myself at like 6 or 7, "Who are you?" Like, I didn't recognize myself. And so I've always been really spiritually curious of, like, where do I come from and why am I here? And my grandma had her own body of work, in the Bible, kind of guiding her and her mindset about it. And there are some concepts that she would share with me every now and again that really resonated and stuck with me. And one of them was this moment where I tried out for the school play.
Yeah.
And I kept telling her, "Can you drive me to see if I made it onto the casting list? I want to be the star of the play." And she would drive me multiple times a day. Like, I was so out of control. She had nothing else to do. She was just babysitting me. And so we would go, and eventually we were in the parking lot this one day, and she said, "Ashley, you need to trust the divine unknown. You don't know what is working at work for you. You don't know what's meant for you. Stop trying to push. Stop trying to make things happen, and start trusting what does happen when you be yourself and you put yourself out there." And so instead of calling the unknown this, like, mucky little thing that I'm so scared and anxious of, there's something really special about how she calls it the divine unknown. And so I've been calling it that for forever. And I ended up doing a master's in spiritual psychology at University of Santa Monica, and they also called it the divine unknown, which was really, really beautiful to see.
And it's man, there's so many different directions we go with this. I want to talk about comfort zone and playing it small and understanding, going back to that Q word, quitting, that all of this, if it's feeling out of alignment, there is something greater waiting for you if you will step off into the divine unknown.
Yes. And, when people feel like nothing's working, they always seem to get into this vibe of, this is bad news. And if there's anything I've learned, when it's not working, it's kind of exciting, because it's like, dang, you're around the corner from shaking things up. You get to have a huge change in your life. And I don't know if it was Emerson or Thoreau who said that most men, and I would add women, obviously, they live lives of silent desperation. And I think that's because, it's the human condition to usually be so afraid of the unknown that we would rather be miserable in our current state. And it's not until we are so miserable that we are no longer afraid of the unknown, because it's not as scary as being where we are. And so for me, it's like, how can we start to get curious when we feel lukewarm and start asking those bigger questions and start, doing what I like to call job crafting, coming up with projects or taking initiative on things that might be different from what you're doing, that you can do on the side, that eventually has potential to be what you're spending all of your time doing.
I love it. And to me, just the very term job crafting implies playing. And I think that you get to play your career. And if your career is not play, you get to look another direction. Okay, we may need to put the food on the table for now, but how can I get to do something that is a third to half of my life that I truly enjoy doing?
Yes. Yes. And that's what's so funny about goals. Like, we set goals because they make us feel something. And, one thing you probably read that I talk about a few times in the book is just setting goals with soul, because we think that the goal is going to make us feel something, and we spend years chasing that feeling, when really we just want to feel a certain way, and we can start feeling that right now. Usually the goal isn't what's going to give you the feeling.
Yeah, you don't call it goal, but you talk about going from the goal line to the soul line, and then you spell goal Goul, because you're putting the spirit back in it.
Yes, exactly. Really putting the spirit back in it. And, if anything, it's like I've really learned that who you are is always going to win. It's always going to shine through for better or for worse. So even if you don't want that to be the case, what you need, what you like, what you really want, eventually it's going to get very loud. So the question is, how much do you want to kick and scream and resist your life versus accepting what you know to be true right now? It's like we know what we know when we spend so much of the day trying to unknow it because it's inconvenient. Change sometimes requires us to rework our life and even blow certain things up with what feels like TNT. But it's so important that you're willing to do that, because otherwise you're stuck in this emotional purgatory where you're not living a life that you want and you're not living the life that you lived either. You're just stuck in between.
Thank you. And since you talk about blowing things up with TNT, it means that we may need to look at fear differently. What we resist persists, but also something that we're very afraid of. Obviously, there's prudence involved, but maybe the very thing that we get to step into, the very thing that the tribe has said is dangerous, that our friends have said, you can't possibly do that, but that you know in your heart of hearts and knowing of knowings that that is actually, oh, darn, I have to try this, which is a get to.
Yeah, I get to try this. And it's fun because I have a lot of friends in spirituality and I hear them say, I get to do this, but I know that it feels like a have to for them. So I know that sometimes language is a game that we can play with ourselves. And I think, I try to just be honest with myself. Sometimes it feels like I have to do something and I know I'm being victimized about it. And I just give myself permission to feel victimized for that moment. And then I move on. I think it's also just a game of seeing the privilege in being alive, seeing the privilege in being able to do things. If there's anything I've seen this year, more friends than not are thriving and their business is doing well. And I'm aware that that's not the case for everybody in the world right now. So in a lot of ways, in theory, it is that I get to, but I also know that everybody's pain, they feel it in the same place, no matter how big or small the issue might seem. So I also want people who are listening to this to pay attention to areas that they do feel like is a have to or a should, and question those as well.
Thank you. Well, actually, I guess before I get to this next question, it means I love the way that you put this. We get to be a stalker, your own stalker, and check out everything. Who's Ashley?
Mm-hmm.
What's she doing? Where's she going? How's she feeling?
Yeah, I had a really cool mentor years ago named Tatiana Ray, and she had this body of work where she used to talk about how we're all kind of like a Mr. or a Mrs. Potato Head, and we all have these little pieces that we put on ourselves and this image that we hold of who we are. And, she asked one time in a mentorship circle, what are the pieces of your Mr. or Mrs. Potato Head? And I kind of looked at myself and I was like, okay, snacksidents, like I love cupcakes. Mm-hmm. And I love rap music and I love personal development. Like there's all of these parts of me that were parts of my Mr. Mrs. Potato Head. And it was like these little identities that I liked to be identified with. And if there's anything I've learned doing spiritual work all of the years, it's that, our ego likes to have an identity. It feels safe. It feels safe. And so anybody who's listening, I would advise you to write on a piece of paper right now, I'm the one who, I'm the one who, and fill in the blank, I'm the one who's always on time. I'm the one who gets a lot done. I'm the one who's really funny and silly. Fill in the blank of what is true for you and ask yourself, how are you limiting yourself by that?
Fantastic. And so let's go from there. And we'll probably dive into some specific techniques, and everybody's just going to have to go out and get your book because we're having some real fun here. One of the things that it takes place with everybody, but I do see it a lot in the spiritual crowd. It's the nocebo effect of the law of attraction. I call it casting spells. Each moment of our lives, whatever thought we have, we're casting spell. Yep. So when we go, I can't possibly do that, or if I do it, things are going to blow up, or things won't work out, we create these self-fulfilling prophecies.
100%. I love that you're talking about self-fulfilling prophecies because the concept always felt really compelling to me as a kid when people talked about self-fulfilling prophecies, but I didn't get to live one out until later. So we talked a little bit about my money mindset, and I want to show everybody who's listening how it can look to be in a self-fulfilling prophecy with fear. So my dad lost all of his money growing up, and we had to lose our home because of it. And of course, my biggest fear was losing it all. And so because I was in that fear of losing it all, just like I did when watched my dad when I was a kid, I operated out of that fear and behaved differently than I might have if I didn't have that fear. I made certain business decisions out of the fear of losing money that I wouldn't have made. One decision was I started to really thrive in my business. I had an online course, and I still have it to this day. It's now called the Job Offer Academy. But back in the day, it was called something else. And I created an online presentation to scale it and get it to the masses. I was so proud of it. And it ended up failing for like a year and a half. I just couldn't figure out how to sell it online. And then one day it hit and my ads started working and I cranked up the volume and I was making millions of dollars in just weeks. And when that happened, it wasn't like overnight success. It was like 2 years of me failing to create the one overnight moment, but it felt like it. And suddenly my business felt like this ATM where money was just falling from the sky is how it felt. And I got about 4,000 or 5,000 customers in just months buying my programs. And in that phase of time, it really triggered my fear of losing everything, because that's what I grew up with. That's what I knew is when you make a lot, you have a lot to lose. That was the story I told myself. And so out of that fear, I behaved differently. What did I do? I hired lawyers and told them to go through all of my assets to make sure I was allowed to be making this amount of money. Like I couldn't even believe it. And they said, okay, well, you have a lot of assets. You probably need to give us at least 6 weeks to a couple months to go through this. And I ended up turning off my entire business because I came from counterterrorism. I came from justice and integrity. And so the story I told myself was, I'm not going to scale a business without getting a check mark from my lawyers that I'm playing fair, because there's a lot of rules in the online world, especially when you're scaling a business, that a lot of smaller businesses, it's not that they don't have to play by, they just don't even have to think about them. And the bigger the game I was playing, the more rules I had to be aware of. So these lawyers took about a month to go through everything. I'd made my millions. I had hired about 7 employees. And by the time they came back to me and they said, hey, there's a lot of like case law that's in the gray zone, but there's nothing you're doing wrong at all. You know, there's just a lot of laws that haven't really formed yet online, and your content looks good and what you're doing and selling seems fine. Keep going. I turned my advertising back on and the profits just weren't there anymore. And so out of the fear that I would lose it all, I hired people to protect me from losing it all. And I turned off my business because I didn't want to lose it all. And then what happened? When I turned the business back on, I lost it all. The profits weren't there anymore. The Facebook ads algorithm had changed. And then I had a team that was more than 6 figures a month of overhead that I was paying. And I had a program that was no longer making the profits that it would take to keep them afloat. And instead of accepting that, I went into denial. I bought into, I think, what a lot of entrepreneurs say. They say, if you could do it once, you could do it again. And in a lot of ways, that's inspiring. But I also do believe that the market changes. And I would correct what they're saying to say, if you could do it that way once, you can do it maybe another way again. And I kept trying what had worked for me, and it wasn't working anymore. And eventually, a year later, I had actually been almost on the brink of debt, and I had to let my whole entire staff go and start my life over. And I ended up being $500,000 in debt, and it took me 4 years to pay off every penny of that. People told me, like, you should claim bankruptcy, and I just didn't want to. And so I was able to pay it off and kind of restart my life. And looking back, I can see how clearly my fear of losing it all created that.
Thank you so much for sharing. How did you begin? Because you had to, at some point, as the internal stalker, said, whoa, I see just what I did. I was taught it's a roller coaster. I just gave myself one heck of a ride. But now that I'm pulling back up, or now that I know that I want to pull back up and that this happened, how do I heal myself and heal these inner wounds or change these subconscious patterns so I don't go there again?
Yeah, the thing about money mindset is I think that for some people, you can have a massive healing and it can happen quickly. But for most people, and especially in my case, it's been a slow burn. I think that we all have an energetic minimum and an energetic maximum with money. Like anybody who's listening to the podcast right now, I could ask them, what is an amount of money where you refuse and would scoff at the idea of making less than that in a month or in a year? that's your energetic minimum, and then we all have maximums. And so what I did was I really took a look at my money. I took a look at my revenue streams. I went back to the basics. Instead of having a highly skilled online platform, I started privately coaching people. I started the YouTurn podcast. I just started doing things that felt true for me in that moment. And then from there, I was able to kind of look at, okay, this is how much money I refuse to make less than based on what my options are in front of me. And I always try to make it like 50 to 60% possible. So I didn't want to stretch myself and come up with a number out of thin air. I wanted to come up with a number that felt possible, but also a little bit challenging so that I was striving. And every single year I set a new energetic minimum and I keep going from there.
Is there something you do to ensure that if you 2x, 5x, 10x your energetic minimum, that you don't go back into the old pattern?
Yeah, I question my beliefs about money all of the time, and I notice when I'm in scarcity about it. So I might write in my journal, like, I'm not where I want to be because, and I'll fill in the blank, or I can't make the money I want to because, and I start to pay attention to what stories I'm telling myself, because that's the beginning of getting leverage on your mindset, is at least just knowing what you're telling yourself and paying attention to what limitations you're automatically buying into. And for me with money, another thing I'll do is when I feel fear come up with money, I'll freeform write in my journal. And I know you love journaling with your book coming out, which is incredible. And so I'll just write from the voice of my fear with money, and I'll just let my hand freely write whatever it has to say. And then I'll star whatever thoughts came out of my hand that I didn't expect, that I kind of believe, that I feel are true. And I'll forgive myself for believing those. So that's something that I'll do on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. I brought up 3 questions in a row that we're going to dive into: self-forgiveness, joy journal, and payoff of anxiety. First off, compassionate self-forgiveness. How huge is this?
Yes. So one tool that I learned at University of Santa Monica that I really tried to share in my book was this idea of forgiving yourself for your beliefs. And it sounds very, I don't know, like basic, but when you can deeply forgive yourself for believing something and really feel that forgiveness, it can crack you open and allow you to drop something that you'd been buying into for so long. And so for me, I might freeform write from that voice of fear with money. And maybe I wrote down, I'm just not capable. I'm just not capable. And I'll star it and I'll put my hand over my heart and I'll say, I forgive myself for buying into the belief that I'm not capable. And then I'll rework it and I'll say, the truth is, I am built of the same things that everybody on this planet is made of. I'm a divine being. I come with batteries included as a person. I am capable. And anything telling me that I'm not is just fear. So I'll just talk to myself kindly, rewire whatever I'm saying. And it's kind of like a boulder forgiving yourself. It's like this big rock sometimes where you've got all of this feeling about something. And every time you forgive yourself for it, every time it comes up, whatever that limitation is, it like chips away a little piece of that boulder. And I think that that's really the work.
So there's a term from Ram Dass, and he says to snuggle up with. And it sounds like what you're doing is you're snuggling up with your wounds, you're snuggling up with your blocks, you're getting in good and comfortable, and you're saying, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more you can give yourself that freedom to really be with where your limitations are, the sooner you can free yourself up of them. And that's just a fact.
Thank you. A brilliant question, I think, was told to you when you got to LA, which is, what is the payoff of my anxiety?
Yeah. I think everybody has a coping mechanism that they operate in the world with. And mine had to be anxiety growing up. So I have, a couple people in my life where anger is where they go and hang out when they're down or they're stressed about life. I go hang out in anxiety. And the thing about it is that it takes you out of what you're doing to the point where it's like a full-time job, and in my case, it's like when I get into anxiety, I can't even think about the thing that I need to be dealing with because I'm too busy with anxiety. And I realize there's kind of a payoff to that. When life feels like too much, I can go hide in anxiety. Another thing with anxiety is that it's so worried, this like thing inside of me that's anxious. It's so worried about me failing all the time that I realize that it kind of takes all of these preventative actions to make sure I'm okay and I'm thriving in the world. I'll over prepare for a presentation. I'll over prepare for something to just make sure I'm okay out of anxiety. And so in a lot of ways, my anxiety has been serving me, and it's taken until now for me to realize like I'm outgrowing it and it's not working for me anymore.
Woohoo!
Woohoo is right.
There's a tool I was using just this week teaching, so I love the synchronicity for, it was our boot camps or our master class where I was having people on a mind map write out what brought them great fun as a child and what brings them great fun now. And you were taught something called a joy journal. What is this?
Yeah, a joy journal is a tool that I've been using not just with myself, but with clients, where you start to ask yourself every single day, maybe for 30 days, what lights you up? What feels inspiring to you? And I got this from a coach that I had known years ago, Alyssa Nobriga. And so I started keeping track of what moment of my day lit me up, especially when I was feeling really low in my job in counterterrorism. And some days it was kind of discouraging because what let me up was like a conversation at the coffee on my coffee break, and it felt like, okay, this tells me nothing about my job and what career path I'm meant for. But it did. It told me that I loved people. It told me that I was meant to have deeper conversations. And so really paying attention over 30 days to what lights you up, and then asking yourself at the end of that period, what skill set am I using when I'm the most lit up? Where do I feel energy from? Who do I have to be energized? It really is helpful to start noticing those patterns and seeing what that can mean for your career path.
Thank you. Since you said who does it mean to be, or what does it mean to be, what does it mean to be a goose?
Yeah, my grandma once had told me that, opportunities are kind of like being a white goose, where it's not that you have to hustle and push to grab them, but you just need to be in an environment where somebody can grab you or catch you or see you for the opportunities. And so that's what made me love networking events in Washington, D.C. when I was in my early 20s, was it kind of made me feel like I was being a goose. I would just put myself in a room of people who had influence or who were making an impact, and I would just have open, authentic conversations with them, allowing myself to get caught in the crosswires of opportunity. And so my grandma used to always say to me, go be a goose. And that just meant go find a place where you can create opportunities for yourself.
Thank you. What would you say is the difference between passion? This brings us back to the beginning in passion and interest.
I would say, first of all, an interest is usually something that you're excited about. And the thing about excitement and interest is that your excitement will run out. It's something you're interested in. It's an interest of many interests. I'm interested in the weather today. Like I want to go out and take a jog, so I'm interested in what outfit to wear. Like interest can be very light. Passions are something that there is just like a fire inside of you. That being said, I still think what you're passionate about is secondary to what your skill set is, who you really are. There's a big difference between what you love and what you are. And not everything you love is meant to be, not every piece of art is meant to be a piece of work. It's not meant to be your career. And so I think it's really important to make sure that any passion that you pursue is backed by a skill set that you have.
Thank you. Which brings us, as we're beginning to wind things down here, you say, don't fall victim to hope addiction. Yeah.
I feel like, when I was writing the book, one thing that I was really aware of was so many people who, if they don't like where they are, whether it's in a relationship or in their career, they're just hoping that it's going to change. And, I had some friends, especially my spiritual friends, that would say, I'm holding a vision. And I love that. There's something really beneficial about holding a vision. But at some point, it feels like holding a delusion that's keeping you stuck where you are versus seeing where you are as the truth right now and taking action from there. So I try to kind of walk that line between the mystical and the practical.
Thank you. Speaking of mystical, who's Benny the cab driver?
Oh my gosh. So one thing that I wrote about was this moment that I moved to DC for a class. Mm-hmm. It was before I really solidified my career and went to graduate school. It was a 1-month class, and it was my first time on the metro. And I got to Capitol South Station, and there was this cab driver there was this homeless guy that I started talking to, and he was super friendly and sweet, and he was helping me figure out my Metro card. And he asked me where I was going, and I was going to an event at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And he said, oh, my boy Benny, you should see him there. And I didn't really know much other than that. He said, he's a cab driver. You'll see him. Go say hi. And so I looked around and I didn't know anyone. So I was kind of looking for
Paperboy hat, if I remember correctly.
yeah, incredible reading comprehension. Yeah. And so I look around the room and there he is. And I walk up to him and I said, "Are you Benny? I met your friend at the Capitol South Station." And I started networking with him. And this guy that I had met on the metro who went to the event with me, he came over and he said, "Look, you sound like you're trying to get an internship or a job. Like, what are you doing networking with this cab driver?" And I felt kind of guilty using the time at the networking event when he was putting it in those terms. But I just enjoyed talking to him and was trying to feel a sense of home in a new city and just wanted to have real conversations with people. And plus, I was already a goose being at that event. And so I ended up saying to him, "Okay, well, it was really nice to meet you. I better keep networking. I'm trying to get an internship." And he stopped me and he handed me his card and he said, "Hey, look." He said, "It's nice to meet you. Welcome to DC. And I've driven for the Clintons before, and I could probably get you a meeting at the White House if you want to meet someone over there." And it was such a moment for me of being like, you never know who you're talking to. And I think that just comes back to trusting life, trusting the grace that's always available in here. And that was so healing for me to really remember that. And I've never forgotten Benny, the cab driver, who did end up getting me a meeting and a networking opportunity at the White House with somebody who worked on the National Security Council. So really amazing life experience. And there were so many moments like that when I started to believe that that was what life was a mystical, series of occurrences that would keep happening for me.
Moments of grace, if you actually say, this falling apart, this happening, this not working out, this whatever, rejection, it's all my path. It's all grace.
Yeah, exactly. It is all grace. And I think the sooner we can trust that and the sooner we can accept when something's not working for us and trust the bigger picture of life, the better.
Woohoo! Where can people go to find your book, Ashley, and to find out more?
I'm so grateful that you're even asking. Well, the book, I know you mentioned, it's called YouTurn, YOU, and the subtitles Get Unstuck, Discover Your Direction, Design Your Dream Career. So anyone who's looking to fill in the gap, feeling like something's missing at work, or really just reconnect to who they are and make their next career move more authentically, the book is available everywhere books are sold, on Amazon. I'm also giving away a bundle of free courses right now, up to 25 hours of video trainings when you upload a screenshot of your receipt for ordering the book. So all you need to do is go to YouTurnBook.com. It's YOUTURN book.com.
Fantastic. If you didn't catch YouTurnBook.com, come on over to InspireNationShow.com. We'll get you over to YouTurnBook.com. Ashley, this has been truly phenomenal, and I think you are really helping people shift for their own U-turn. On that note, any last words of wisdom you want to share with people?
Man, I mean, there's so much I could say, but to be honest, like, they already know who they really are. And that's my word of wisdom. Nobody gets to tell you who you are. You already know. And it's just a matter of removing the layers that are keeping you.
And just to riff off of that you know who you are, you may be in denial. You know who you are, but you're fighting against it. So go back, listen to this again, get U-turn, and then become your own stalker, and you'll figure out who you know you truly are.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ashley. This has been truly, truly phenomenal.
I'm so happy that you had me, and I hope this helps whoever it's meant to help today. And thank you for mentioning my book and everything. I'm so grateful.
You're so welcome. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get U-turn, and begin discovering a new direction in your life today, and shine bright. Woohoo! If you're looking to make a U-turn in your life, then this beautiful interview with Ashley Stahl is phenomenal. What I liked is that she brought the University of Santa Monica heart and spirituality and psychology side of things, while also bringing the DC practicality and how-to side of things and melding them both together. So I had a ton of fun. I hope you did too with this interview. If you want to learn how to tap into your inner wisdom and learn how to turn your journaling into channeling, meaning to go from an I, me, my to a here's what you do, here's how you get to do it, and figure out where to go, how to get unstuck, and get divine intervention and direction in your life. Check out our new book, The Automatic Writing Experience. You can find it now on Amazon, and you can also find our entire video-based program at automaticwriting.com. untitled.com. To check out more incredible videos, click here. Be sure to subscribe below and click on the bell icon. Be notified of upcoming shows, YouTube premieres, live events with me every Sunday night. Big thumbs up if you like this. Leave your comments below. And above and beyond all else, shine bright.